Now on to our panel of practitioners. This panel is titled Smart Data for Communities, Vision and Implementation. It's moderated today by E. Stephen Emanuel. Introducing Steve today is Margie Polaire, Director of Consulting Services for CGI. CGI is a global IT solutions and business consulting company. Margie has over 30 years of public sector experience as a director with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority and Chief Economic Development Officer with Choose New Jersey, a nonprofit economic development organization. Margie, over to you and our panel of city and industry practitioners.
Thank you, Spencer, and good morning to our virtual audience. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Steve Emanuel, the moderator for today's panel. Steve has a long history in the public sector as CIO of various federal, state, and local governments, and in the private sector working as an expert in technology solutions for the public sector. Steve's background includes working for Amtrak as their CIO of the Northeast Corridor operations. He left there to work for Montgomery County, Maryland as their CIO, and then he returned to New Jersey as the Chief Information Officer for the state of New Jersey, leaving in 2016 to work in the private sector for 10-4 as their Senior Industry Advisor for the public sector and regulated industries. More recently, he returned to the public sector as the CIO for the city of Newark. He is now a Director of Consulting Services for CGI, a premier global IT and solutions and business consulting company. Steve's unique background allows him to provide valuable expert advice and solutions to the state of New Jersey, in addition to its counties and cities. One little housekeeping note, if you have any questions during today's panel, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section on your screen. And thank you, and turning it over to Steve.
Well, good morning, all. Thank you and welcome to today's panel discussion on smart data for communities. I'm truly pleased to be sharing this hour with three leaders that have really shown how integration and use of data is making a difference. Joining me today are Bernadette Kucharczuk, the CIO for the city of Jersey City, Tim Moreland, the Director of Office of Performance and Open Data, City of Chattanooga, and Ruthbea Yesner, the Vice President of IDC Government and Insights Group. In today's world, we all have a dependency on data. Every role in the workforce is either creating or collecting data, and many of us are responsible for managing and presenting that data. Many of us began assembling data to demonstrate productivity. As we moved into leadership roles, data was the basis of our team's performance. We use data to showcase the value of services that our organizations provided. With the advancement of corporate networking, the advancement of the internet, and the explosive increase in network-connected devices, data sources continue to grow at a pace we would have never considered 15 to 20 years ago. But data growth over the last 2 decades has been huge. I mean, I really don't want to date myself, but I remember when we simply collected, stored, and created reports that were statistical reports for people. I remember when we were very frustrated by some data that we collected that was challenging to use. Video and audio data was analog, and other unstructured data limited our ability to truly correlate and make good use of it without long and arduous processes. Transforming data sources to digital formats was a game changer. Quickly, we were using a great deal of our data as the basis of key performance indicators. KPIs were not only showed productivity, but they helped us with performance trends and in very basic ways enabled us to predict outcomes or the ability to reach goals. But adding fully digitized data and the tools that have been made available today, our ability to deliver mission-critical information seems to have no boundaries. Today, data and performance management are an integral part of almost every organization. We have a unique privilege during my senior tenure as a New Jersey State Chief Information Officer. I was able to create and recruit the nation's 9th state chief data officer. At last count that I'm aware of, 28 US states have now officially designated a chief data officer, with at least another 7 states considering that role. But with the overarching value that we have having data resources to managing monitors data is putting it to use and to answer government and business mission critical questions and help drive decision-making by enterprise leaders. Today, we're going to share some of those examples of how the use and presentation of data has taken organizations into that smart data community level, something I like to call the intelligent community ecosystem. So let's get started. Each of today's presenters will provide a brief overview of their roles, their organization, and showcase through dialogues, examples, or imagery how their organizations are utilizing data to meet the vision and promise to their communities. So first up for today's panel is Bernadette Kucharczuk. Bernadette is a certified government chief information officer, currently serving the city of Jersey City as the Director of Information Technology. She is also an adjunct professor for the Masters of Public Administration program at St. Peter's University and the immediate past president of the New Jersey chapter of GIMS. Prior to her current role in Jersey City, Bernadette served as the IT director in Atlantic City, East Orange, New Jersey, as well as Sutter County, California. Prior to her government career, she served as a decorated officer and navigator aboard KC-135 airplanes in the United States Air Force. Bernadette holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Information Science from the University of Pittsburgh and a Master of Aviation Management from Embry-Riddle University. Please welcome Bernadette.
I'll start off by just mentioning that I am not a data scientist. I see my role more as Dean Goldsmith earlier described as a data science enabler, somebody to facilitate the collection, storage, and distribution of data. As a generator of data, I would say I would probably mention my solar system panels on my house and my poor man's Tesla Model 3, which I hope at some point we can all agree on whatever the standards are going to be for fully automated driving so that I don't have to drive myself to work anymore. My role is also as a protector of core data, and I would be remiss if I failed to mention this as a vital component of data analysis. The open records laws in government generally make people believe, some people at least believe, that security is unnecessary because it's all open data, it's all public data. What does that matter? However, it really is critical to our ongoing operations. And if we started exposing our core infrastructure systems to people to be able to, dig directly into our core resources that weren't air-gapped in some way, shape, or form, that would provide additional risk to our organization. And risk management is obviously a core function for a chief information officer. So I wanted to start off by just saying that our open data portal journey is one that perhaps is unique, but also perhaps somewhat common throughout any local government's journey. We had a new mayor that Stephen Fulop brought in. He was dedicated to technology and to improving technology in the city of Jersey City. And he brought in an innovation team. And just as was previously mentioned, it was started partially with a grant funding through Bloomberg. So public-private partnership began our journey. And then we were able to move forward with that Office of Innovation to start collecting data over time. And we were very excited when we launched our data portal in October of 2015. You'll see that we had 44 data sets and 16 dashboards were initially rolled out in our first iteration of this. And there was a lot of excitement around it. There was a lot of people trying to find, well, what is it that we could distribute? What kind of data would be there? What kind of information might be important or might people be interested in? And we had explosive, rather, growth. In January of 2016, we went to 140 data sets and 19 dashboards. Increasing from 44 to 140 in just a few short months. So there was a lot of focus and attention, and this was The neat, keen new thing to do was collect data and find ways to distribute it and make it be publicly available. And then we had steady growth after that, which is, if you are following the Gartner mapping of how projects generally go, we increased still in 2016, focused more perhaps on the dashboard side of things as opposed to the data sets, just finding better ways to display it in maps and graphs and things that might be consumable. And then we hit the trough of disillusionment, which most every project goes through. Things kind of stagnated by 2017. We did still have some increase in data sets, marginal increase in dashboards, but the energy was sort of out of the project. It was not really the high point and focus. And so we were kind of starting to lose ground. This was also the point that we decided we were probably not in a position where we could continue our current path. We thought the format could be better served if we went with a different solution. So much of 2018 was redesigning our data portal. And this is what our data portal initially looked like. And then we had, after our rebuilding, this is our current data portal. And the thing that is significant, I think that really helps, is that we have exploring data and how to use it. We have some tips and hints to the people who might be interested so that they understand what to do with the data and how they might be able to use the data. This has caused a resurgence in our data sets. As you can see, we're now up to 819 data sets being produced into our structure. And the current portals, we have a few less dashboards, mostly because we're thinking people are going to figure out ways to view and look at our data from the data sets directly. And we have some flexibility with that. But one of the ones that I do wanted to take a brief moment to mention, if I stop my share, is the COVID portal. And I've just sent a link to everyone with the COVID portal specifically. We weren't COVID ready, not because we started at the pandemic. We were already poised and positioned for collection and distribution of data. And our HHS director, Stacy Flanagan, understood the value and the use that the data could use from the very start of the pandemic. Jersey City had and continues to have a lower percent of infections as our surrounding area. And our director of HHS used the data to establish local drive-through spots, local testing spots, and vaccination sites. To make sure that we were targeting the areas, especially in the early parts of the pandemic, as it was kind of moving through our community. We wanted to make sure we were testing in places that were accessible to our citizenry who are not all able to drive. And also to make sure that this was something that could be accessible by everyone in the community where they were at. Moving forward, we have a data migration challenge, which might be an opportunity for an externship. So it's very fortuitous timing for me to be a part of this panel and hope that maybe we can continue to work with our academic partners as we move forward. Back to you, Steve.
Bernadette, thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Tim Moreland. Tim is the director of the Office of Performance Management and Open Data at the City of Chattanooga. Tim and his small team work to make the city more citizen-focused and data-driven in their delivery of services. Tim has over 5 years of experience leading the City of Chattanooga's data-driven efforts for the Burke administration. Tim has a background in planning and came to the world of data through his interest in geographic information systems and open government initiatives. He calls himself a data nerd, and he loves to use data to better serve the public. Please welcome Tim Moreland.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to give a little example of how one of the small ways we use data here in Chattanooga. This is a fire story. So we have a very data-driven fire department, but it took us a while to get there. It started with accessing their data and kind of seeing what's actually in their systems. From that, we built a operational dashboard so that they could kind of have an easier view of what's actually occurring in their day-to-day operations. You can view a version of this on our public open data portal, which I just put in the link here. But around the time when we started getting them into looking at their operational data and having some of these discussions, they started to hear from some of their stations that there were individuals in the community who were taking up a lot of their time on what we call 554 calls. These are invalid assist calls. So non-emergency calls where someone needs help, assistance, maybe they're disabled or unable to get something they need or fall down and can't get up. You know, it's these types of calls that they were going on. And they were seeing that there were some individuals that were calling, you know, like twice a day, 3 times a day, consistently for, you know, every single day. So that's like 60, 70 times a month. So there was some anecdotal news that was a problem. We actually went and did an analysis just to see like what's actually happening for these calls. And we saw, yep, there's definitely a trend. It's like a 5-fold increase since 2013 on the number of 554 calls that are coming in. So the fire department realized that this trend doesn't seem to be abating and it's only increasing. So we need to do something about it. Also, just from a human perspective, realizing that these are folks in crisis who are not getting the services and the help they need. So they're going to just keep calling until they do. So we need to address the root cause of the problem. And so they started to think how they might do that creatively. They didn't, you know, they had limited staff to be able to do this, but they started to look for partners, and they found partnerships in the local university's School of Social Work. So Social Work School had students who needed real world experience with case management. And we identified a whole host of people who need case management support to help them be more successful in their life. And so there was kind of a perfect marriage between those two things, you know, the needs of the citizens, the needs of the students, and the need of the CFD to serve them and reduce those calls so that they're more operationally available for, you know, other emergency calls when they come in. So they created something called the CFD Connect, which is really about connecting and helping folks getting access to the resources they need to live the life they want. And it's just, you know, we have some internships who are embedded with the Chattanooga Fire Department. They look at the data and see where we've seen our most callers coming in. And then they actually go and do outreach to those folks and try to get them on to get them more stabilized in their resources and the things they need so they can keep living their life. So just to give you kind of a sense for what that looks like in the data, we have a whole dashboard. I don't have time to show, but it's really interesting to kind of see how they do the pre and post. But here's just one example of an address. So this is the orange is the number of calls they were making before CFD Connect. The green is the number of calls they were making after CFD Connect. You can see on CFD Connect in August, there was a pretty marked drop on number of calls they were making. That's when we did our first initiation. And then soon after that, those numbers have been fairly low and stable since the time. So, you know, this is, we're consistently seeing this. This is, I think, 8 months of data so far. I think it's a newer program, so we don't have as much data, but 8 months of consistent lowering is great for this address. And when we use other addresses, we see the same kind of trend going on. So what's cool about this is it's a cheap program. You know, it's not having, you know, a full-time nurse practitioner or a doctor or anyone else, you know, running those calls with folks. It is students in case management expertise who are, you know, meeting people in crisis and providing and connecting them with the resources they need to live their life. And it seems to be working. So that's one way we kind of use data to test the antidote, see where the problem is, do some root cause, and then actually develop a program around it. And now we're looking at trying to replicate something similar for non-emergency calls where maybe police officers don't need to be responding, but maybe we could have a social worker responding for mental health or substance abuse or other kinds of things. So this kind of initial foray from the fire department, we're thinking about parlaying into police as well. So that's one example from Chattanooga.
Thank you, Tim. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Ruthbea Yesner. Ruthbea is the Vice President of the IDC Government Insights and Education Group and the founder of its Smart Cities and Communities practice. This practice analyzes the strategy and execution of emerging technologies such as the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, big data, and mobility, and best practices such as governance, innovation, open data, and business models essential for smart city development. Ruth B joined IDC following work in product development in Silicon Valley. Prior to that, she worked in state social services. Ruth B holds a Bachelor of Arts from Wesleyan University and graduated summa cum laude from Boston College with a Master's in Business Administration and Master's of Social Work joint degree. Please welcome Ruth B.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. So I lead up a group at IDC. I am also not a data scientist, though I use data quite a bit. We're a really data-driven company, and we're really a high-tech market research and advisory firm. And so we don't do implementations. We collect a lot of data, a lot of research, and we use that to inform our customers. And those customers are state and local governments, universities, and also the suppliers to those markets. So I love the fact that I have the opportunity to kind of straddle all worlds and work with municipalities, work with counties, work with state government, work with vendors. And so that's sort of what I'm going to do today in my 3 short slides, is, provide some information on some of the trends that we're seeing within state and local government around big data analytics, and sort of provide an overview layer on top of what Tim and Bernadette were talking about around specific projects. So give me 1 second as well to share my screen. All right, great. This is a busy slide. What I wanted to do was really provide a snapshot of some trends we see within state and local government around big data analytics specifically. And this is from an annual survey that we do every year. So it's from June. So it's fairly, I think, recent data given how quickly we see state and local government moving. And what I want to really point out is, even though I'm going to be talking about sort of the trends around the technology of big data and analytics, what I think is really important is to consider the fact that the technology is really one piece of a very larger set of success factors that make the use of data, the implementation of these tools effective. So even while we're talking about business intelligence software and AI and all these other things, I think with the concept of data, there's a lot to discuss around digital trust and a lot to think about around data culture within an organization, security and privacy, compliance issues, which I think Bernadette had mentioned, legal issues. And all of those are really important when we think about how to effectively implement these solutions. So it's not really about the technology itself. It's about all these other factors that can be internal, external to an organization. And then I really also think it's about the outcomes of that data, right? So a lot of people start with, we want to do analytics, but actually you do analytics to get information about specific outcomes and specific need areas that you have. So sort of starting at the top here, this is some survey data that we have that I put in a really busy slide because I wanted to do everything in 3 slides, and so I crammed it all in here. But what we see at the top here, starting with top uses for big data analytics, so this is US state and local government respondents, is they're really looking at using it to allocate resources more effectively, improve product performance that they have, maybe network performance, and improve security. And I think it's interesting because this has remained relatively consistent over time, except for security. It used to be that analytics was really tied to efficiency and sort of workflow processes, and we see security kind of boosting higher on the list. And I think what's interesting is that compared to other industries, so if we look at ranked priorities of initiatives, state and local government actually prioritizes analytics and big data below mobility, security, IoT, and compared to other industries, really does not prioritize it at the same level we see, let's say in retail or banking or at the federal level. So I think that's been pretty consistent where there's a little bit of a lack of focus on analytics. And so I highlight that because I think that's something that really is changing, and there's a lot of pent-up demand, especially from COVID, but it's a really important characteristic. if we go below that to this box with the bar charts here, this is really showing that almost 50% of state and local governments are not even considering or not yet pursuing any type of big data analytics initiative. So I think what we see is that there's a real tremendous amount of growth that could happen here and a lot that could be done because really very few have it in production or even in production city-wise or enterprise-wide. And then the middle box here is really just talking about for those that have implemented initiatives, where are they seeing that they really need to increase investment? And I think this is a little bit telling too, which is why I put this out here. Number one, 50% of them are reporting increased spending in storage. So I think this is the issue, right? There are requirements for storage. There's a lot of video and unstructured data that takes up tremendous amounts of storage. There's a lot going on here with how you actually keep and manage data and how long you do so. So I think that's really driving some of the trends there. And then secondly, around IT services, we really see a lot more work as we see the variety of data sets increasing and their sort of connections to each other increasing for visualizations and dashboards. A lot more need around, systems integration and consulting services and those types of services. So just pointing that out, that those are, if you're thinking about projects, those are two areas that you really do need to pay attention to when you're thinking about your spending. I'm not going to go through all the rest of these. I'll share these slides. I did just want to make one more quick point about this lower box here around the cloud and big data analytics. And what this is basically saying is that most organizations are really looking at a cloud also or a best fit model, which I think best fit makes a lot of sense, right? You don't always have to be cloud first. There are some systems that maybe aren't ready or aren't at their end of life, or there's not a need to migrate, or migration may cause problems. So I think we see a really varied approach, and I think a strategic approach in terms of what workloads and systems folks are moving to the cloud, and I think that that's good. So I just wanted to point that out. So my next slide really is also just to point out that there's a lot happening with data sets and cloud environments that I think are really important to think about as we think about what's happening with big data analytics. So what this is really saying in a lot of different words is that there's a lot more data types that are being integrated and put into analytic environments, and that has a lot of implications. So if you look at this 82% bubble, up front, this only 10% of organizations were integrating 10 or more data types into their environments in 2018. It's now up to 82%. So we see a tremendous variability, which is really one of the tenets of big data, right? Around the types of data that's in the pipeline. And I think that really has a lot of implications around skill sets and around the vendors you might use and around all sorts of compliance issues. So I really wanted to point that out as something really interesting. The other thing that we ask about with state and local governments every year is how they feel about their data. Is it timely? Is it trusted? Is it secure? And I think what we note is that state and local governments in the US don't feel that their data is granular enough or complete enough or easy to understand. So sort of the lowest ranking are those three qualities. And I think when we think about that, your data is not complete, it's not granular enough, and you can't really understand it. That has a lot of implications around how you set up systems, and also is really related to the fact that there's so many different data types coming in and what kind of information you have and what's going into systems. And so the last point here too, and I think we've seen a lot of examples, and Steve Goldsmith talked about these as well. There's just a tremendous amount of diverse use cases that you can use data for, and it can be for small, medium, or big organizations. Everything is data. Everything is becoming instrumented, right? He pointed out the kiosks and the streetlights. So the fact is the use cases can be really diverse. And the key thing is to think about, what needs your community has and how they feel about certain types of data being collected. That's extremely important. And then there's a tremendous amount that you can do with your data across a wide variety of departments, public safety, environmental, transportation, et cetera. And then I have one more slide, which is really just talking about drivers and inhibitors to adopting big data analytics. And I wanted to point just a few things out on this slide. I think, we've talked about it, and I think everyone sort of understands a lot of the drivers. COVID, yes, I think Bernadette mentioned this, really sort of opened up a lot of pent-up demand for data, and it also educated the community on the value of data, right? Like I had people who had never seen a dashboard who were checking out COVID visualizations every day, and it's like the world suddenly understood the power of data and what you could really do with visual data and with dashboards. So I think that was really tremendous. I think it also showed that there was a real demand and interest from the actual municipalities. And some real challenges that they have to address. So I think we see a more executive level focus, which is great. There needs to be sort of a leadership drive around using data and implementing, data analytics that is supported by a formal effort to really improve the data literacy and data culture, right? Are people really protective of their data? Do they not want to share? Well, then, having aggregated data on a dashboard could feel really threatening. And so, what kind of culture change is happening there? And then I think we also see a lot more AI and automation within data products. And that really frees up a lot of these data native personas to focus on analysis and other things rather than some of the other things that can be automated, which is really good for productivity. And as we know, just the last one, there's just going to be a tremendous amount of disruptions. We know it. We know there's weather disruptions coming. We know there's still disruptions from pandemic around the world. We know there's going to be disruptions constantly. And so the question is, how do we build in resiliency and digital resiliency to respond to that? How do we build up the idea that we could have really good data insights really quickly? And I think this sort of elevated uncertainty is really driving some of that discussion around analytics. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about inhibitors, because I think they're also really important when we're thinking about implementing and real world examples around BDA. I think we all know there's a shortage of skills and relevant talent. This is really felt, I think, in government. And so I think having some real innovations, like we've said, externships and universities and partnerships, upskilling employees, there are employees that you could use and could be retrained internally. They don't always have to have an IT background. It's really true. So I think really thinking creatively about how we can find people who are interested, I think like Tim was talking about with social workers, right? Really interested in using and the outcomes of data. I think the other thing is that there's a misalignment between the expectations of capability and outcomes. There's always from the supplier side, a lot of excitement and exuberance. And, we see, for example, in Professor Goldsmith's presentation, all these things that cities and states are doing. It sets people up to feel like this is a huge mountain, there's tons of expectations, and at the end of it, everything's going to be rosy. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes into that. And so you really need to set up realistic expectations for what you can do. And just quickly, the last couple that I really think are really the last two things I'll make comments on, I won't go through the rest of them, that are really important is this third bullet, which is there has to be trust and understanding of the data. So if you can't explain how data is generated or the outcomes or a system AI generated recommendation, people don't actually use the data or follow it. So if I look at a chart and it says there's a data label, is that data label, is that defined the way that I define that piece of information? Is it the way I need it? So really there has to be this tight link between users and departments and IT to make sure that there is explainability and trust and that everybody understands what the data means and it means the right thing. And the last thing is, I think there is a real importance on identifying the right data. So you can say, oh, we really want to look at, they were saying the rat population. Maybe that's fairly simple and you can think about how you might use video or other things to identify movement to check out rats. But when you start to think about policing or transportation and the multitude of modes of transportation or environmental monitoring, what is the data that you really need to be culling out and looking at that leads to these insights that you need? And so you really start with what do you need? What are the outcomes you need? And do some iterations and playing around with things, because I think you want to be able to identify the data you need to pull in, and you want to be able to use that for insight. And I think the last point about that is, we are seeing the instrumentation of a lot more information, streetlights. So there's this operational technology and this information technology convergence. And that means that even within the IT department or the water authority or the people who are using SCADA systems, there needs to also be some more collaboration and training and work together so they can understand the systems and how to use and identify relevant data. So thank you so much. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ruth B. And I want to say thank you to all of the panelists today. I think, the common theme that I think everyone has seen today is really, this is about utilizing data to solve business challenges and business needs. This started with Dr. Goldstein's conversation, and I think each one of our panelists hit that very common theme that we need leadership to drive what things they need to see in a data-driven, visualized process. And that's when you see the success. So as we can see, organizations can exemplify how data is being used to advance our communities into that intelligent community ecosystem and deliver on the promise of value. And we all know this is only the beginning of the journey. So at this time, I'd like to turn the program back to Margie to facilitate our Q&A part of the session. Margie.
And thank you, Steve, and thank you to the panelists. Very interesting and informative information. There are a few questions. First, I'm going to start with one. Actually, this is for Tim and Bernadette, if you want to take turns. The question is that Dr. Goldsmith said, if it's not well visualized, it's hard to get it done. Are there any suggestions or stories to help us understand how you have successfully used visualizations in your positions? And maybe just one example would be great. Tim?
Yeah, so I'm not going to give an example, but it's more about the how that gets us to the what, if that makes sense. So what Ruth B has just said about designing visuals with the people who are using them is so very important. Anytime we actually are working on creating visuals, we have something called our data jam sessions. So that's basically where we have like a data engineer, a data scientist, and the departments sitting down together and having a conversation about what do they need, what questions do they have, and then we iterate and actually develop the visualizations in real time. If they say, oh, I need an extra column or I need to see this other thing, then the data engineer will pull that into the data set right away. Then they'll re-visualize it and say, does this work for you? And it's a very kind of build with, not for model. And so I do agree that visualization is kind of the aha moment for folks when they can see it. We're visual learners. But it's not just making it visual, it's how you get to that visual and are people bought into it and trust it. And so the way we do that is with a kind of co-design build with format.
Great, thanks so much. And Bernadette.
Yeah, I think we took a slightly different approach. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen here and show you that we've laid it out there for people to make their own, right? So make a map. And then you just click to add a data set, and you can, choose whichever data set is of interest to you as far as our COVID
food trucks for sure. We want to know where the food trucks are.
Everybody wants to know where the Jersey City food trucks are. So, there you go. So here's your map, like in an instant. So definitely, I agree. It's a very important that it has to be, what somebody is interested in and what data they're interested. And like I said, we kind of flipped it on its end and said, well, here, we'll just expose the data sets to you and you can make your own. Now we do have a couple of predefined maps, but for the most part, we're just figuring people will choose whatever is important to them. and map it themselves.
Okay. Oh, that is absolutely wonderful. And now I know where the food trucks are. So when next time I go to Jersey City, I know where I'm going. Ruth B, this question is for you. Where do we have needs? Any type of really big prioritized needs, but we have big data gaps. So where are those challenges around, the data gaps in terms of prioritized needs? Like, what would you say is the most priority need?
I'm wondering what priority need might be. I mean, it could be sort of about the data itself. So I think I'll give a two-pronged quick answer, and then I'd love to hear what Bernadette and Tim might have to say as well. So on the one hand, I think there are some prioritized needs around actually the data and the data pipeline and the whole data process. So one of the things I mentioned that I was talking about is that folks don't feel that they always have complete or up-to-date data. We've just done a big work with the Canadian government and policing around, are their addresses and master name indexes all accurate and complete, and how does that feed into a lot of systems? So I think there's a big need area to use a lot of automation and different tools to make sure that the data, stays clean and complete as possible, because that's the foundation. I think in terms of use cases, so for example, public safety or emergency management priority need areas, I would say there's a lot of them, but the first thing is to understand what your community needs. So it might be that there are different needs based on the community. So I'm a big fan of some community engagement around defining what people really want. And I think that's has to be pretty proactive, and it can be kind of challenging. They were mentioning in the 311 that some people never called 311, so it looks like they don't have any problems. That could be solved by automating some things or instrumenting some things, right? You could actually use some technology maybe to supplement the fact that a neighborhood isn't calling 311. That might give you some insight there. That could be a big need area that you have. So I think some of the big priorities are, A, they got to be community-based. B, if you can't get information from community, there are tools that you can use to kind of collect and supplement direct community engagement. And of course, we see the most happening around public safety and transportation and emergency management. So those are the big priority use cases that we see in terms of sort of global investment. And within that, a lot of investment in video. So I would say that that's sort of a fixed visual surveillance is a big one for what people are using as a edge data collection tool.
Can I add something to that, which I'm not sure if other cities are experiencing this, but there's a renewed focus on equity and thinking about who's impacted most in understanding the disparities in your service delivery and also just outcomes for folks. And so I don't know if this is where this question is going, but I think that is something that we're becoming more aware of and thinking about. A lot of those discussions start with the data and understanding what the data says about the disparity. And sometimes we don't track the data and we don't have that information available. So it's hard to kind of have those first level of discussions about what's going on in our communities. I mean, there's definitely good community level indicators, but I'm talking more operationally within city governments. How are we doing in delivering X, Y, or Z service, that kind of thing.
Right. Bernadette, any comments from you? No.
I think they covered it.
Yeah, I think to Tim's point, I think this maybe goes along with that, but what do you think is and this is for Bernadette and Tim and even Ruth B, if you have any comments about it, but what is the next low-hanging fruit in the near term regarding untapped opportunities for using data for improving under-resourced communities in your cities?
Can I take that? Because I started to talk about it, and I think the untapped is right. I think there's communities, it's characterized as under-resourced, but I think they're just underutilized. Like there's immense potential and like human capital and just amazing things that are just not being leveraged in these communities. So one, having the data for kind of putting an equity lens in what you're doing. Data is also really helpful for understanding those inequities once you get to it, and potentially empowering the communities so they can build their own kind of data understanding, like Bernadette was showing, so they can be empowered to show what's going on in their community and have those conversations with folks. So I think those are all, really, really important. And we've already talked about how shifting from kind of a self-reporting model to a surveillance or maintenance model might work for some city services, especially when there's, it's biased on the data you're pulling into your systems and who's using them. So I think it's just echoing a lot of what has already been said for some of this.
Ruth B, any comments or Bernadette?
I don't know if Bernadette had her mute off. Do you want to jump in, Bernadette?
No, it's okay.
Okay, well, I was actually just gonna say one thing that I think is interesting when we do think about maybe communities that have been ignored or they're not sort of as engaged, is really thinking about how you're collecting data, because there's very different feelings about it. We can kind of see this with vaccinations, right? There's very different feelings about science and doctors and shots based on the group that you are part of in the US. So an example was there was a university really wanted to expand an urban agricultural program and actually tie it in and do some precision agriculture. And they wanted to put some videos and camera feeds and other technologies in some urban gardens. That has a very different, that could be pursued and construed very differently around the academics, to suddenly having like the urban garden being monitored. It kind of looks like a police state. There's video camera. Why are there video cameras in a garden? So I think it's really important to actually consider how you're collecting data and how that may be impacted by equity and accessibility issues as well around your projects, because we can just think all technology is great and people can feel really differently about that.
I'll jump in here because I think it's kind of dovetailing off of what Ruth B was just saying, but also about what somebody has posted in the Q&A is that, you have siloed departments and people are, not used to this kind of collaborative sharing, and how is the, impact of the police response data perhaps going to be impacting, where HHS has to do additional training, and being able to think cross-departmentally and getting people's concept of what that means and how that can impact the community for better is a big challenge. That's a cultural change inside the organization, because these are places that are not used to speaking to each other and are not used to collaborating, but yet they need to move the organization forward. So I don't know that that's a data specific challenge. I think that's just more broadly a managerial thing that has to be addressed. But it certainly plays out in the collection and response to the data.
Can I ask a question? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I want to
ask you guys a question.
Okay, let me add on to that real quick. We're thinking more about linked data. And so the privacy concerns are kind of expanding. When it was siloed before, it's like, oh, only police can see police data, only code enforcement can see code data, but we're actually going to be linking all those data so everybody can see it, and then, having a standardized address. So then it becomes like, you can know a whole lot more about someone when we have all that linked data together. So the privacy issue, it kind of expands as you start doing this work, and it's more effective because you can do it for more things. But then there's that community conversation about who should have access to it and how should have access to it. And it just adds a whole nother can of worms for things. Sorry, go ahead, Ruthbea.
No, that's a really good point. I was going to ask, and it made me think of that example. I think it was in New York City where they were able to link like Uber receipts with pictures of celebrities to find out how much they tipped. And it's like suddenly this aggregation of really weird data was kind of a privacy invasion. So I think that's a tremendous point. The more you combine data, the more you can identify people. I was actually going to ask you about the siloed thing, because we come against it a lot when we're working with departments, is who is holding the data? Because sometimes if folks are thinking, oh, we want to start a platform, we want a cloud-based platform, no one can agree like, all right, well, who's like managing that platform and who's taking care of all this and who's paying for it? And so I was just curious how you're doing it, I guess, because I think that can be a real challenge.
Right, and I think too, from a financial perspective.
Yeah, yeah, who's paying for this, right? Yeah. If
Mhm.
multiple departments are using it.
I think in some ways, you know, just more broadly about IT organization and structure, our city is still pretty solidly centralized, which does provide some value in this particular area for this particular reason. We are, if you will, as I said at the beginning, the keepers of the data, but we are not the owners of the data. And so I really push back whenever somebody tries to say, oh, well, this must be an IT responsibility because IT, you know, has the servers that the data is being stored on. But it's not. That crosses the line into, you know, it's not up to IT to decide who gets access to what and who gets, you know, those kinds of things. So it's really trying to, again, build that coalition, if you will, of people who understand, you know, why this is significant, and changing that culture so that the organization can understand who should protect and be that privacy guru. Because like you say, once you start aggregating, all of a sudden things get really weird really fast.
Yeah, in Chattanooga, my office is kind of the one who helps aggregate that information. So we partner very closely with IT and the departments. And we have an internal data sharing site, which is kind of like for city employees only. And then we have a public open site. So there's kind of two levels. And then within that internal site, you can also silo off. So it's completely private, if that makes sense. So that's how we have it set up now. It took some relationship and trust building with IT, because, you know, they are the data keepers. And so they wanted, like, can we trust you? And do you have permission from the data owners? And so that's where really boring things like data governance and data governance groups and things like that, like, it's important, y'all, and you got to have it to build trust and to have and have those things in place so folks can don't feel like it's the Wild West of the data and people just slinging data around everywhere. So that's been really kind of instrumental and important for us in Chattanooga, is having strong data governance and a data governance group, and kind of building that slowly, that trust over time, so that we can have a central repository where, you know, anyone can kind of view each other's data.
Great.
That's great.
Great feedback. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, and this is a biggie, I think, is what, if anything, can state and federal government and external collaborators like industry and academia do to partner with cities and counties and the local municipalities to better utilize big data for positive impact in under-resourced communities? But also, you know, so like, first of all, there's financial assistance that you can get from state and federal government, but what about the partnerships? And maybe Tim, Bernadette, Ruth B, jump in as you will.
Well, I know even though we are very progressive in general, we still don't have a really good, solid, you know, GIS system in place. I know that we're using the GISs that are publicly available. We've got a lot of reliance on Google Mapping and things like that, and that's it was an investment that prior to my arrival wasn't really made. And so we're kind of trying to figure out if we are at a point where we can leapfrog and perhaps not go down that rabbit hole where we would spend a lot of those resources, mostly because the state of New Jersey is very involved with doing, you know, something more broadly and uniformly across the entire state, which then picks up those smaller communities, the smaller municipalities that don't have the resources and don't have that information. But yet it provides value to have that at the state level. So I do think that that's, you know, an area that, you know, still is yet to be fleshed out, and a place where we could certainly, you know, make more improvements here in New Jersey.
Okay.
So one of my sheroes is Jen Palka. She started Code for America, and she has
I was just going to mention them.
She has the this kind of delivery-driven government model, which is really about infusing data, design, and technology in the delivery of policy. And I think what's missing from our federal and state folks is they think they can design the perfect policy and kind of codify the whole thing and then hand it off to folks and they implement it. And what we're seeing is that we need flexibility, and we need to use data to iterate and to find better solutions more quickly than what the policy cycle allows us to do. And so I would love to see some federal and state government kind of push that delivery-driven governance and kind of and have a close time with data and policy and design and technology, so that we can be much more nimble with our policy and the programs that we put together, because it's just going too slow and the problems are too big to have to take that long to solve.
And I would just add to that point, I think there's some onus here on the municipalities. I know that they're small and can be really resource strapped, but if you don't want to be at the whim of state or federal policies, then you have to be involved in the policy discussion, and they have to really feel that there's a value to their input. Because I think I 1000% agree with you, Tim. And then my last little quick, I know we're running out of time, but around partnerships, I also find that cities have trouble holding folks accountable in partnerships, and they kind of can get short shrift. So I think there really needs to be a proactive stance around partnerships when you're working with a university or a private partner. What are your outcomes? What are your measures? And how is what you're getting sustainable over the long time and not just a little tiny short project?
Great. Thanks so much to everyone. We are out of time. I'll turn it just back very briefly to Steve. And then thanks to everybody for participating. Steve?
Again, I want to thank everyone for their insights, their participation, their creativity, and most of all, your time. This has been a great discussion. Thank you again to our audience for listening in. We think this is more to come. Spencer, back to you.
All right. Thank you all, Steve, Margie, Ruth B, Tim, and Bernadette. This really gives a super rich sense of the scope involved in real world implementation. Fantastic, wonderful anchor for the morning. So all this really positions us perfectly for our workshops today and as a baseline for tomorrow's academic talks too.